Making brushes in Illustrator is relatively easy, but the, the main principle behind it is knowing which type of brush to make and which type of brush is appropriate for the job in hand. So I can make brushes out of all sorts of things, all sorts of drawings that I've made, all sorts of combinations. These are just the same lines here with intonation put at either side, a variable width. And these are just Option drag and then Command D copies of rectangles and circles and so on. And they'll all work very differently depending on the way that you create your brush. So first of all, I'm going to kind of get rid of a lot of these brushes, so let's just dump them. And remember, I'm only dumping them from the swatches. They're not being dumped from the libraries. They still exist in the library. And let's get rid of some of these as well. So we'll just leave the basic ones. Whatever I do in this brush panel only lives in this document. So when I open up the next document, I'll get the default panel back again. So if I wanted to create, let's just say, a very simple brush, I can make a drawing. This is just a fill and a stroke, and I can either drag it into the brushes panel, or I can say make new brush, or I can say make new brush down here, and you'll get lots of options. So if I do it in this method, it's going to give me all of the possible options, and I can create a calligraphic brush out of this, a scatter brush, art brush, bristle brush, and pattern brush. Now calligraphic, if you remember, those are the brushes in which you have orientation. So if I make a calligraphic brush, I'll be able to, with that brush, give it an angle of orientation so that when it's being used, so I'm just going to grab the brush now, grab my brush, it literally has a very fluid movement, but notice it's missing the center. So calligraphic brushes are really for something a lot more simpler. You really just want to control the angle, the roundness, which I can do here or here, and the physical size of the actual brush itself. So there's not really much point me trying to make this into a calligraphic brush. The most common way to work with a calligraphic brush is really to duplicate the brush, double click it, and then you can create your own version of that brush. And here's one going in the opposite direction. So the next type of brush I want to show you is the art brush. So I'm going to skip the scatter brush for a moment, move to the art brush. The art brush allows you to make a flourish with your brush or to follow a path, and it will spread anything out along that path and stretch it to fit the stroke length. So you have to decide whether this is a suitable shape for that type of brush. So for instance, what will happen when I apply it to a rectangle is that, so it's not very suitable for this kind of effect. And then if I use the brush tool and draw with it, then it gives me this sort of wobbly version of the circle. Now you can always edit brushes. You just simply double click them, provided they're in your brush panel. And I'm going to leave switched on preview so that you can see we can scale proportionally, but you can kind of see that that doesn't really help us an awful lot. It still gives us this sort of quite vulgar stretched stroke. So it may be useful, but it's probably more appropriate to look at creating a brush that is going to have a continuous flow. So something like this, I'm going to create an art brush. And then it's always actually very important that once you've created a brush, you deselect the original drawing. And then I'm going to draw with that brush. So you can see something like the scroll brushes now, but it's my own version of the scroll brush. Or I can apply it to shapes. And we can reduce the stroke size to make it neater. Okay, so you're going to get a sort of frame for a rectangle, and it will follow a circle through. So that's quite a useful brush. If I'd given my brushes an intonation, so a variable width, and we'll call that one an art brush as well. And let's just select the same shapes. You'll see I get this sort of diffusion as the edges meet. And then if I just simply pick up the brush and draw with it, again we get the end and the beginning of the brush disappearing into a sort of claw. So this brush has been made by creating an art brush out of this type of shape. We know this one would stretch. This one gives us some kind of juncture. And then I've created another art brush from this shape. So let's just have a look at what that does. So this gives us quite an interesting effect. So it really depends on what you're trying to achieve, what type of brush you choose, and the original shape that you're working from. Now, the next type of brush is a bristle brush. Bristle brush is very much like the calligraphic brush. It's different in that really it's all about creating something which is supposed to be a multi-haired brush, bristly. And they're generally quite soft. But really, if I tried to make any of these shapes into a bristle brush, they'd all look pretty much the same. So I would end up with a brush that looks pretty much like these brushes. And if I try and apply it, it doesn't look much different. So it bears no relationship to the original shape. What, again, you should do with bristle brushes is, I think, just use a bristle brush and edit a bristle brush so that you tell it how many hairs to have, how long, how short, thickness and opacity, etc., etc. See the next video for scatter brushes and pattern brushes.